Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. My name is James David, and in today's video, I would like to talk about air plant care and how to cultivate and grow them in your garden space. Now, these are the collection that I have managed to put together on the element where some of these plants were actually sold in showrooms and even plant care, and some of them are from my own collection. And I would like to talk about all their details and how to care for them in a context where these are actually grown in a tropical climate zone. Now, you must understand when it comes to air plants, they do behave very differently according to their climate zone, and these particular ones can be very different, especially here where it is grown more on the element where it is exposed to sun and rain. Just to give a little bit of a basic introduction here is that you must also take an account, especially if you're cultivating them in a tropical zone. I must say there are a few different types of air plants. Some of them are very much silver, and some of them in the green colorization, and some of them are very close to the Bromeliad family, where they do require to be cultivated in a potting medium. There are also some that is known as Spanish moss, which is a type of air plant which is also identified as a bromeliad species. So there's a kind of a thin layer of to say there are subspecies of bromeliads, and some of them are air plants. So in the idea here is to actually identify the one that appears to be very easy to cultivate and able to grow very well, and in a way that is not a sensitive plant. And I want to talk more on this detail here, especially when it comes to cultivating them in the tropical zone, because sometimes, and I noticed that it is true that the ones that actually is very expensive and rare and difficult to care for do come from a highland plants, so they do require their growing condition to be according to the type of air plants. Coming now to my tip number one when it comes to air plant is that if you are a new beginner and you have not tried your hands on them, I would recommend that you should try your hands on Tillandsia Ionantha. If you look at it, it appears to be something like a crown of a plant, sort of like a bunch kind of thing. These are actually in green colorization, and when they grow a lot more, you will find that they will sort of produce pups, and they will somehow appear to be like a Christmas kind of an ornament, more like a ball shaped kind of brushy DV stuff. Now, there are so many things that I want to talk about it, and I'll try my best to cramp all this information as best as possible. But one of the most important things when it comes to air plants, which I find the number one killer of it, is fertilizing, and especially in the context of over fertilizing can cause them to suddenly rot away. And this is one of the things that I find, that the element where this particular plant tend to perish simply because of overfeeding. And that's one of the mistakes that I've actually done, which I want to share with you here, is not to actually use heavy fertilizing or feeding on them, because this is one of the reasons why I lost almost half or even all of my air plant collection. And this is one thing that comes to a contention where it's sort of like a paradox, where if you don't use a fertilizer on them, they don't really grow very well, but if you overuse it, and the whole thing can just succumb to rot and even withering away. And there can never be a reverse factor on it, because once the rot takes place, the whole thing will just collapse, sort of like from the crown onwards. The rot will sort of like eat up the whole plant, and you would have lost the collection. So when it comes to a very important tips on plant care on this is that to ensure that these air plants do get a airy kind of a place where they are exposed to good sunlight, but more of an indirect bright sunlight, because even a scorching heat can also cause damage. So one of the things that I've actually noticed that because these are actually air plants, they do require air movement. And I want to say something which is a little bit more on the context of deception, is that sometimes I've noticed a lot of places where they would sort of create these air plants in more on a decorative zone, where they put them in a glass bottles or hang them indoors and make it look very attractive, and occasionally use a spray bottle and just spray on the air plants. They can survive, but on a long-term basis this will just wither away. So one of the things that's required here is to treat them like orchids, if you can imagine it, or even stuck conference. You can see in most of this collection here how it's actually been displayed. These are the things that is required for air plants, especially number one, in the factor of airflow. It is very important that air movement is required for these air plants. So when it comes to a tropical zone, I find that it is much more easier to place them where they receive morning sun or evening sun, and also exposed to rain. In a way that this is very important, because this will ensure that the plant A does have its own supply of water and sun, instead of constantly moving the plant around for this sun and rain element to be placed on them. So coming to a context where I want to explain here is that tip number 2 is not to move around your air plants up and down. That means to say that if you're keeping these in indoors and suddenly you feel like you want to soak them in water and then you put them out, it's if you find that it's very much like a chore for you, I would suggest that this is actually a wrong style of cultivating these air plants. One of the things that I've noticed in what I want to mention here is in my tip number 3 is not to move your plants too much, because this can actually sort of like bruise them accidentally, or in a way that you will see that constant change of light and movement can damage the plant, and also can in a way stress the plant. I just want to bring an attention where these plants are found in their natural environment, where they have already fastened themselves on a tree or somewhere which is stable without much movement. So in a way you'll find that the element of lighting and water is fixed for them. So when these are actually been constantly moved around, they can suffer stress, and one of the factors here is that it can actually damage the plant in long-term basis. I'm not saying that that is impossible not to care for them, like let's say like once a month, or at least 2 months once, you can actually fully submerge them into a bucket of water for 30 minutes and let the plant to sort of like get itself all these nutrients and all that. That is very much okay in a context, but it is not so necessary, because in doing so in long-term basis, one of the things that I must mention is that when the plant is much more bigger and more in a proper size, water drainage that actually sits at the crown of that plant, especially these air plants, can cause them to rot. And these are the telltale factors where the element of danger here is that if this fertilizer that's been applied, which is chemical based, then if it's sitting inside the crown of the plant, it can cause the air plant to easily rot, and you can actually lose your plant. Another tip that I would like to share here is air plants flowers, and this is actually a very huge topic, and I would like to cover a little bit of it here in this particular video. Is that do take note, and a good news factor is that when you do see air plants flowering, it means that it's going to produce a lot of pups around it. At least one pup will actually merge in, depending on the type of plant or type of air plant. Now I must say that there is a setback here on the context where the parent plant may eventually wither away. It's sort of like similar like bromeliads. In most cases, when a bromeliad flowers, the parent plant just fades off, sort of like it has finished its cycle. So this is one thing that you have to be very careful of, as some of the air plants do continue to keep the flowers in a green form, in a way to say you would not have fully faded away. So that is one tricky part, is not to dead hit them when the flower is still fresh. There are cases where some of the flowers just dry off and you can actually trim them off, but when it comes to the bigger versions, especially the larger types, do not disturb the flowers. And sometimes the flowers tend to put out a bigger, longer spike, and from there the pups may appear to be forming. So be careful not to trim off the flower buds thinking that it's finished or it is finished its cycle. You might lose out a very big part of it, especially when it comes to the plant cycle. As you can see here, these are the collection that I have in my garden. These are the one that I've actually purchased from this plant fair, and sort of like it has finished its flowering cycle and it's already putting up its pups. And you can actually see here how the light factor here is involved, where it gets bright indirect light and sort of exposed to an element of humidity where it's actually cultivated just below the water pond. I'm actually using fern bark as a medium to tie the air plant roots. Basically, the air plant roots do not actually take in any of the nutrients from the roots. It's just more for anchoring purpose. So do take note that when you water the air plants, do spray them on their leaves at least once a day. But take note that when they are watered, they should dry off within an hour's time. In case they are still remain to be wet and sort of like green in kind of a soaking kind of factor, do place them in a place where it's very airy, in a way that they dry off immediately, because too long, if they are actually sitting in water, they may cause to wither because of rotting problems. Another most important tip that I must make mention that is always done in an ignorant way is the use of exposed metal on the air plants. And I find that somehow metal tends to react against the leaves and sort of like causes burns. Perhaps that could be an issue where leaching of chemical has been taking place, or could be the rust factor where it is exposed to rainwater and that kind of stuff, and somehow it does damage the air plant. And I find that using an insulated wire to fasten them actually helps them much more better. Or you can actually use a garden wire that somehow actually keep them in a long lifespan, rather than they seems to sort of like burn up due to the heat element or the sunlight, where they can actually have certain reaction to that. So I find that using insulated kind of fastener, whether you can even use a fishing line on it to fasten them, because I find that anything got to do with metal or wire, exposed wire especially, can harm these air plants. Now, this particular tips that I actually found in a plant fair, which I have contention against it, because somehow I believe not everything that you actually read on a commercial point of view may be true. And in this case, I want to make mention about it, that it could be generically printed out here and placed here. In a way, it is not entirely true, and I would like to talk about these pointers here. Like number one here, place the air plant near a window. Actually, it is very debatable depending where is this air plant is being placed, whether it's placing them at the outdoor near a window, or internally and placing them in a window. In this context is not really helpful. I would rather say place them in an indirect light area where it gets bright light but not exposed to direct hot sun. And even in that case, it should be in an airy environment where the air plant is getting air movement in a way such that it dries off when it's watered. In a way to say, like at least in an hour's time, the plant is dried. This is very good in a context where if you were to have an airy balcony area, let's say if you're staying on an apartment or somewhere in a condominium where it is very windy, this would be a very excellent place to place them. Otherwise, if you're having a challenging place where it is not windy, a bright lit area but not direct hot sun will do that trick. Watering too can be on an element where it is actually debatable, because some air plants can actually handle the weather where it can actually be watered every day, especially like Spanish moss, where they do require at least 2 or 3 times in a day depending on dry and hot weather. Unlike some air plants, they may only require to be watered like alternate days. It all depends on how much the element of drying factor takes place. So to say to water them once a week may not be enough, and that the element what is going to take place here is that if the air plant is not receiving enough water, they will tend to shrivel and sort of like slowly die back, and that could actually cause your plant. Also, it is in a way that you can also give too much care if you were to put them too much in water and how do you say, soak them too long. So do handle that with caution. I think it's safe to say that you can actually soak them at least 2 weeks once or 1 month once, depending if you have the time to do so. But if you really don't have the time and you're too busy, you can actually forego it. You can just spray water on them, or actually heavy water on them like a rainwater. Now, one of the most important thing that I would really make an emphasis is not to use chemical laced water such as direct from tap water, especially the chlorinated water. Rainwater will be the best, and the secondary will be like keeping a bucket of water for an overnight, especially the tap water, and let the chlorine leach out, and you can actually use that as a watering medium for this air plants. Otherwise, you can also use water that is been filtered, and that will actually also will help. So do take note that you will know that if the air plant are actually facing burns on their leaves, it is due to the factor where the water content is contained chemicals such as chlorine or heavy metal in it, so it may not be good for this particular air plants. Now the last one, I would rather not, I'm not agreeable about this factor of keeping it pruned, because I find that is actually very funny. Because if you were to prune the air plant, where actually you're going to prune them, you're going to cut them into half. It's at least the only thing that you can actually consider is to take out the dry leaves, which may take place, but that would actually take months. So, and if you don't really do so, it's actually okay. It is not necessary that you must disturb them, and you can actually accidentally damage the plant, or you can even break the air plant into half. So I would have to say that unless the plant has aged itself for years and you just want to prune it or sort of like clean it up and deadhead the dry leaves or the flowers, you can do so, but just once, at least 6 months. And if you don't really want to do so, you can actually just leave it as it is. So not everything that has been said here is actually accurate. I've now come to the end of my video, and this is the part that I would really like to ask you for your favor. And if you really can, I would really appreciate very much that if you can actually subscribe to my channel. And this actually helps the YouTube algorithm to sort of like select and show the element of traffic that takes place in my channel, and this would actually create more awareness for all the other gardeners here who may want to see more of the detailed information on my garden space. And hence, when there's a lot of traffic, this will actually help to garner more interest in my channel. One of the factors that I've actually noticed is through the analyst is that I only find that only 2% of the people here who actually does click like and subscribe to my channel. Hence, I would really like to make emphasis here for a request. And if you really like my video, and if you find that my videos and my channel is beneficial and helpful for your gardening experience, and you look forward for looking into my garden space, I would really appreciate seriously if you can click like and subscribe to my channel, and do place in your comments, and I will more than happy to entertain and indulge myself in putting in all the queries in according to your questions based on my experience and my knowledge. Also, I would really like to request that you do check out in all the other videos here, which is under popular and most viewed, and see if at all any plants that actually garner your gardening experience. Thank you so much for your support, and see you again in my next video. Take care and have a nice day. Bye.